Okay, so in this tutorial, or I guess this will be two tutorials, we're going to look at how to attach the ball rig to a curve. In fact, if we open this up, let's play this. So this is the example that I showed in class of a ball kind of rolling in. And if we were to do this kind of hand keyframing, if you want to think of it that way, where we would just set the key of the position and the rotation along the way, we'd have to do a little bit of work. And also it'd be a little bit difficult trying to make sure that we did the right amount of rotation. And it's a little more complicated, just at the beginning, trying to figure out some of these tools. But once you understand this process, there's a lot that you can animate very quickly. So let's go ahead and dive into this little refresher. So I'm back at the ball with stage master file, right, that we're just going to start with. And I'm going to go to my top view here. And one thing that I did in class was I clicked on the ball placement control, and I'm going to right click. When I right click on NURBS curve object, it shows me the components here. Actually, any object will show you the components, but here we have the control vertex. What I'm going to do is select that one in the center and move it just a little bit back. And I'm going to select these two on the ends and move it just a little bit forward. I'm going to right click on it and say object mode. The reason I've done this is just so that I can tell which way is the forward direction of the object based on the control curve. The other thing I want to make clear is if I come over to the move tool in the toolbox and I double click, if I reset the tool, it's at the world orientation, which we can see, maybe you can see this down the bottom. The Z is pointing down, Y is straight at us, and the X is off to the side. But I'm going to change this to the object orientation. And now if I select this control and rotate, and I click the move tool again or hit W, you can see that it's oriented based on the object's rotation. Okay, so this is going to be helpful for us to make sure that the object is moving in the correct direction down the curve. All right, so I'll close that out, and I'm going to zoom back out a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and draw the curve that the object, the ball, is going to follow, right? So to do this, we need to grab a curve tool. So we can go up to create curve tools and get them here, or we can just make sure that we're clicking on the curve shelf, curves and surfaces. And this third icon is the EP curve tool, right? So when I've clicked on it, it's now active and loaded. When I draw this curve, I don't want to do it too sparsely in trying to draw this. It's going to kind of auto round based on the kind of algorithm that it uses to draw these curves. But I don't want to draw it too densely either. We don't want to put too many points. So just with a modest number of points. The other thing is I'm going to draw from the outside of my stage towards where I want it to end. In this case, I want it to kind of end up where the ball rig is sitting at the center of the world anyways on this pedestal. And I'll just go ahead and click. Right. And we'll have it end right there. And once it gets to the point where it ends, I'm just going to hit enter. And if you see any areas where you're not quite happy with the drawing, let's just go ahead and right click and say control vertex. And let's just do a little positioning. This one, not quite what I wanted. All right, just making a few little edits. And I'm going to zoom in on the curve here. Okay, and again, I didn't draw this to make sure that it ended up exactly where the rig was. That's just the nature of how it happened in this example, right? But wherever you want the ball to end. Okay, so we've drawn that curve. And then I do, in the viewport preferences, I've turned on the anti-aliasing and everything, so I have a little thinner, smoother line. Hopefully you can see that in the recording pretty well. So I've drawn the curve, And what I need to do now is attach the rig to this curve so it follows along with it. But whenever I do any constraining, I always think it's a good practice to constrain something else and then attach whatever kind of controller to that. And there's several reasons for it in this that's too complicated to go into for the tutorial. But I would want to have some freedom. So, maybe what I would do is constrain an object to this, and then without using constraints, parent something to that controller so it would run along, but I could still animate that object moving off of the track, so it were, right? So it's just about giving yourself freedom, because once I constrain that object, I can't really animate it away from the constraint, right? So I'm going to go back to my perspective view. And what I'm going to do in this, let's turn this, I don't need that on there. Okay, so I'm going to go up to create, and I'm going to create a locator. I'm going to use this to kind of attach itself to the curve. Right, so I've created the locator, and then I'm just going to hold down the shift key so that I have both of them selected. And in either the animation or the rigging menus, I'm going to go up to constrain, motion paths, and I'm going to choose the option, for attach to motion path. And I'm just going to reset this to the default settings. So right now it would just be the length of the time slider. I want to change this from start to end and just say from 1 to 90. It could be whatever, and you can certainly modify this later, but for this example, that's what I'm going to do. This is the most important part, and I saw several students miss this in class, where the front axis here, the default is X. So when we model, often we would model a character or a car, vehicle, plane facing in the Z direction, and the X would be considered the side to side and the Y would be the up. So if I were to model an airplane, and I just took that airplane and attached it to this curve that was flying through the air, the plane would fly sideways, right? The wing would be the leading edge of the flight path, which I think we all agree would be wrong, right? And in this case, the ball rig is oriented with Z facing forward. And I put that little indent actually in the placement controller so that to remind myself of that. So I'm just going to change the front axis instead of X. I'm going to make this Z. And I'll leave the up axis as Y, which just means it's pointing directly straight up in the air is the kind of the world axis as it tries to orientate its rotation in any way. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and hit apply and close this. And what we can see now is after I performed that operation, Maya automatically selected the locator, right? It's called Locator 1 in this example. And under inputs, it has a motion path. Now the translate and rotate now have information on them, and they're colored yellow to indicate that there's some constraint action going on there. And it now has position, so it's reading out where it is in space now based on being attached to the curve. If I click on motion path 1, there's the U value, so this is the length of the curve. And if I move the time slider, you can see if I get to this point along the path, it says 0.393, which this would be 0% along the curve, and at the end would be 100% or 1, right? So right now, 0.393 would be 39.3% of the way along the curve itself, right? The other thing, too, is you can see that as I move along here, the Z is always pointing down the length of the tangency, the direction, right? So it's pointed in the right direction. That's exactly what we wanted because we want this to be oriented facing forward, as it were, right? Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on the locator, and then I'm going to hold the shift key and click on the placement control node, right? And I'm going to come back up to constrain parent, and I'm going to choose the option. I would say almost always choose the option box, the dialog box, so that you can make sure, in fact, I'll do reset. If it's set at the default, maintain offset is turned on, along with translate and rotate is the constraining, which is perfect, right? But the maintain offset is not what we want. We don't want the object to move with the locator, but maintain this offset. We want it to be exactly where that locator is. So let's turn off maintain offset and hit apply. Close this. And so we can see we now have the ball moving along the path, right up to the pillar. The problem being here, obviously, that it's submerged in the floor. That's totally fine. I knew that was going to happen, and that's not an issue for us. It's actually could be helpful down the road. So I'm going to go into my side view, and I'm just going to click on the ball move control, which is the blue curve, right, that I bent a little bit, so it'd be easy to select. I'm just going to move it up in the Y direction, and I'm doing this at frame 1. I haven't added any keyframes to this. It's highlighted yellow because I have it in a character set. And I'm going to hold down the space bar again and go back to perspective view. And now we'll see if I just play. You can see the ball's just zipping along on its little path, right? So this is all perfect. This is exactly what we want at this point. Not having any problems. The next part of this is to calculate or figure out what the length of the curve is, figure out what the diameter of the ball is, and then calculate how many times it should rotate as it travels that distance so that we can make sure that they match with each other, right? So I'm going to do that in part 2 of this tutorial, so I will see you in a second.